Hi guys, let's start part 3 of chapter 3, that is Nationalism in India. 3.3, The Limits of Civil Disobedience. Not all social groups were moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was the nation's untouchables, who from around the 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanatanis, the conservative high caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. He called the untouchables Harijan. So Mahatma Gandhi called the untouchables Harijan, or the children of God. So he called them uh, he called them Harijans, the children of God. Organized satyagraha to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads, and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of the bhangi, the sweepers, and persuaded upper caste to change their heart and give up the sin of untouchability. But many Dalit leaders were keen on a different political solution to the problems of the community. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. So, political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited, particularly in the Maharashtra and Nagpur region where their organization was quite strong. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Classes Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Roundtable Conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits. When the British government conceded Ambedkar's demand, Gandhiji began a fast unto death. He believed that separate electorates for Dalits would slow down the process of their integration into society. Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhiji's position. Ambedkar accepted Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhiji's position, and the result was the Pune Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed classes, later to be known as the scheduled caste, reserved seats in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were to be voted in by the general electorate. The Dalit movement, however, continued to be apprehensive of the Congress led national movement. Some of the Muslim political organizations in India were also lukewarm in their response to the civil disobedience movement. So, some of the Muslim political organizations in India were also lukewarm in their response to the civil disobedience movement. After the decline of the non cooperation Khilafat movement, a large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. From the mid 1920s, the Congress came to be more visibly associated with openly Hindu religious nationalist groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. As relations between the Hindu and Muslims worsened, each community organized religious processions with militant fervor, provoking Hindu-Muslim communal clashes, and riots in various cities. Every riot deepened the distance between the two communities. The Congress and the Muslim League made efforts to renegotiate an alliance, and in 1927 it appeared that such a unity could be forged. The important differences were over the question of representation in the future assemblies that were to be elected. Here's a figure. We have a figure here. Figure 10. Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Maulana Azad at Sevagram Ashram, Wardha, 1935. So, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leaders of the Muslim League, was willing to give up the demand for separate electorates if Muslims were assured reserved seats in Central Assembly and representation in proportion to population in the Muslim dominated provinces, Bengal and Punjab. Negotiations over the question of representation continued, but all hope of resolving the issue at the All Parties Conference in 1928 disappeared when M.R. Jayakar of the Hindu Mahasabha strongly opposed efforts at compromise. So he strongly opposed. When the civil disobedience movement started, there was thus an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between communities. Alienated from the Congress, large sections of Muslims could not respond to the call for a united struggle. Many Muslim leaders and intellectuals expressed their concern about the status of Muslims as a minority within India. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority. We have a source D. In 1930, Sir Muhammad Iqbal, as president of the Muslim League, reiterated the importance of separate electorates for the Muslims as an important safeguard for their minority political interest. His statement is supposed to have provided the intellectual justification for the Pakistan demand that came up in subsequent years. This is what he said. I have no hesitation in declaring that if the principle that the Indian Muslim is entitled to full and free development on the lines of his own culture and tradition in his own Indian homelands is recognized as the basis of a permanent communal settlement, he will be ready to stake his all for the freedom of India. The principle that each group is entitled to free development on its own lines is not inspired by any feeling of narrow communalism. A community which is inspired by feelings of ill will towards other communities is low and ignoble. I entertain the highest respect for the customs, laws, religions, and social institutions of other communities. Nay, it is my duty, according to the teachings of the Quran, even to defend their places of worship, if need be. Yet I love the communal group which is the source of life and behavior and which has formed me what I am by giving me its religion, its literature, its thought, its culture, and thereby its whole past as a living operative factor in my present consciousness. In my present consciousness. Communalism in its higher aspect, then, is indispensable to the formation of a harmonious whole in a country like India. The units of Indian society are not territorial as in European countries. The principle of European democracy cannot be applied to India without recognizing the fact of communal groups. The Muslim demand for the creation of a Muslim India within India is therefore perfectly justified. The Hindu thinks that separate electorates are contrary to the spirit of true nationalism because he understands the word nation to mean a kind of universal amalgamation in which no communal entity ought to retain its private individuality. Such a state of things, however, does not exist. India is a land of racial and religious variety. Add to this the general economic inferiority of the Muslims, their enormous debt, especially in the Punjab, and their insufficient majorities in some of the provinces, as at present constituted, and you will begin to see clearly the meaning of our anxiety to retain separate electorates. 4. The sense of collective belonging. We have a figure here, figure 11, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and early 20th century print. Notice how Tilak is surrounded by symbols of unity, the sacred institutions of different faiths, temple, church, masjid, frame the central figure. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation, when they discover some unity that binds them together. But how did the nation become a reality in the minds of people? How did people belonging to different communities, regions, or language groups develop a sense of collective belonging? This sense of collective belonging came partly through the experience of united struggles, but there were also a variety of cultural processes through which nationalism captured people's imagination. History and fiction, folklore and songs, popular prints and symbols all played a part in the making of nationalism. The identity of the nation, as you know, is most often symbolized in a figure or image. This helps create an image with which people can identify the nation. People can identify the nation. It was in the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, that the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. In the 1870s, he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later, it was included in his novel Anandmat and widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Abanindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata, figure 12. So, figure 12 here, this figure 12. Bharat Mata, Abanindranath Tagore, 1905. Notice that the mother figure here is shown as dispensing learning. So, here in this figure, she is shown as dispensing learning, food, and clothing. The mala in one hand emphasizes her ascetic quality. Abanindranath Tagore, like Ravi Verma before him, tried to develop a style of painting that could be seen as truly Indian. So, this is the painting of Bharat Mata. In this painting, Bharat Mata is portrayed as an ascetic figure. She is calm, composed, divine, and spiritual. In subsequent years, the image of Bharat Mata acquired many different forms as it circulated in popular prints and was printed by different artists and was painted by different artists. Devotion to this mother figure came to be seen as evidence of one's nationalism. So, devotion to this mother figure came to be seen as evidence of one's nationalism. Ideas of nationalism also developed through a movement to revive Indian folklore. In late 19th century India, nationalists began recording folk tales sung by bards and they toured villages to gather folk songs and legends. These tales, they believed, gave a true picture of traditional culture that had been corrupted and damaged by outside forces. It was essential to preserve this folk tradition in order to discover one's national identity and restore a sense of pride in one's past. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself began collecting ballads. So he began collecting ballads, nursery rhymes, and myths, and the led the movement for folk revival. So Rabindranath Tagore, he led the movement for folk revival. So here we have a painting. Figure 13, Jawaharlal Nehru, a popular print. Nehru is here shown holding the image of Bharat Mata and the map of India close to his heart. In a lot of popular prints, nationalist leaders are shown offering their heads to Bharat Mata. The idea of sacrifice for the mother was powerful within popular imagination. In Madras, Natesa Sastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales, the folklore of southern India. So in Madras, Natesha Sastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tales, the folklore of southern India. He believed that folklore was national literature. It was the most trustworthy manifestation of people's real thoughts and characteristics. As the national movement developed, nationalist leaders became more and more aware of such icons and symbols in unifying people and inspiring in them a feeling of nationalism. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, red, green, and yellow, was designed. It had 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. By 1921, Gandhiji had designed the Swaraj Flag. It was again a tricolor, red, green, and white, and had a spinning wheel in the center representing the Gandhian ideal of self-help. Carrying the flag, holding it aloft during marches became a symbol of defiance. Carrying the flag, holding it aloft during marches became a symbol of defiance. Another means of creating a feeling of nationalism was through reinterpretation of history. So, another means of creating a feeling of nationalism was through reinterpreting was through reinterpretation of history. By the end of the 19th century, many Indians began feeling that to instill a sense of pride in the nation, Indian history had to be thought about differently. The British saw Indians as backward and primitive, incapable of governing themselves. In response, Indians began looking into the past to discover India's great achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments. So, they wrote about the glorious developments in ancient times when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religion and culture, law and philosophy, crafts and trade had flourished. This glorious times in their view was followed by a history of decline when India was colonized. These nationalist histories urge the readers to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under British rule. So, these nationalist histories urge the readers to take pride in India's great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable conditions of life under British rule. Here we have a figure. So we have a figure here. Figure 14, Bharat Mata. The figure of Bharat Mata is a contrast to the one painted by Abanindranath Tagore. Here she is shown with a Trishul standing beside a lion and an elephant, both symbols of power and authority. Okay. These efforts to unify people were not without problems. When the past being glorified was Hindus, when the images celebrated were drawn from Hindu iconography, then people of other communities felt left out. So, when they glorified more about the Hindu rulers and about the histories about Hindu, then the other communities they felt left out. Then we have source E. In earlier times, foreign travelers in India marveled at the courage, truthfulness, and modesty of the people of the Arya Vamsa. Now they remark mainly on the absence of those qualities. In those days, Hindus would set out on conquest and hoist their flags in Tartar, China, and other countries. Now a few soldiers from a tiny island far away are lording it over the land of India. So now let's come to conclusion. A growing anger against the colonial government was thus bringing together various groups and classes of Indians into a common struggle for freedom in the first half of the 20th century. The Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. So the Congress under the leadership of Mahatma Gandhi tried to channel people's grievances into organized movements for independence. Through such movements, the nationalists tried to forge a national unity. But as we have seen, diverse groups and classes participated in these movements with varied aspirations and expectations. As their grievances were wide ranging, freedom from colonial rule also meant different things to different people. The Congress continuously attempted to resolve differences and ensure that the demands of one group did not alienate another. This is precisely why the unity within the movement often broke down. The high points of Congress activity and nationalist unity were followed by phases of disunity and inner conflict between groups. In other words, what was emerging was a nation with many voices, wanting freedom from colonial rule. Okay, that's all, guys. See you in my next video. Bye.